In the year 2020, I decided to write a novel. It was meant to be a science fiction adventure story. Star Wars meets Mass Effect, hero's journey, 3-act structure, pretty standard kind of deal altogether. It was lockdown, so I thought, why not? I've always wanted to write a novel, and there's probably not going to be a better opportunity to have so much free time than now. And so that's what I did, 100,000 words over 1 year, and I produced a perfectly serviceable first draft. And you know what I thought of that first draft after I had finished? I think this might be shit. I always wanted to be a writer/storyteller ever since I was young. Kind of started when I really got into reading and learning how to read and absorb stories. Throughout the years, I'd written short stories, maybe short novellas, a lot of screenplays, because I had an interest in film. But I never did anything with the finished products. They sat on USBs, on old hard drives, just collecting figurative dust, I guess you could say. I never could work up the courage, I guess, it takes to bring them out to a wider world. So I decided to do the thing that I'd always been tempted to do and had never done. I had tried to, write a novel. But to set the scene of the circumstances that led to me being able to do that, I just moved back to Australia after living overseas for several years, working as a journalist, mostly producing short news, video and interest pieces. I was a little bit uncertain about what my next steps would be, especially coming back to Melbourne and living in Australia again. It had been quite a long time, quite short figuratively, but long emotionally, I guess you could say, to understanding what I wanted to do now that I was back. The COVID-19 pandemic happened to come along at this exact time that I was making this transition, and it did give me an opportunity, like some people talk about here, of what my next steps could potentially be. Unfortunately, one of those steps did not include having to live in my parents' house once again, in the small, tiny cabin that I had not lived in since I was a young teenager. Soon a pattern evolved. I was waking up in that cabin, working 9 to 5 in that cabin, and then doing other creative work in that cabin, and it became its whole universe. I felt like I knew that cabin a lot better than when I was young and being a teenager. And whether I wanted it to or not, it became the perfect setting to bash out a first draft of a novel. But that didn't mean it was necessarily easy or difficult to do such a thing. I'm not a maverick writer. I'm not saying I'm God's gift to writing or the best thing ever. But I did discover 4 tips during this process that helped me get to the end of that very first serviceable draft, which I think all people should try and aim for if you want to try and take on a task like this. These 4 tips really helped me when I was going through this particular period, and I'm sure even now, pandemic or no, they can really help you as well. Number 1, routine is key. Whoever said you have to wait for inspiration to hit to start writing was kind of exaggerating how much inspiration actually plays a part in the whole creative process. Some days during work I was continuously coming up with ideas for characters, setting, places, but I think it needs a routine established where you revisit those ideas and those inspirations again and again and again. And the way you do that is by writing every day, if you can, or at a set time that kind of works for you, that you can do and that you can always go back to. My particular guidelines that helped me for my own personal set of circumstances was that for 6 days of a 7-day week, I would commit to writing 500 words minimum each of those 6 days. If I wrote more on a day and a particular, creative session, then more power to me, I guess. But it had to be the minimum of that 500. They just had to be done. It was kind of like the rule that I had to, give myself in order to accomplish. And even though 500 words kind of sounds pretty manageable when you have families, social commitments, which granted during the pandemic I didn't, but it can be hard to juggle everything as well. I sometimes think that burnout can be a huge thing for creatives trying to kind of do something or make something of themselves. And I think you have to be kind of, hard on yourself, yes, in terms of to produce something, but I think there's always limits, and self-care is really important in this regard. So that's why I picked 500 words, where it's doable, but at the same time, it's just that little bit extra that you can do that can really make a difference when you start piling those days and weeks together. And though I had nothing but time during the kind of height for the pandemic, I mean, getting those 500 words done wasn't easy. It was pretty agonizing at times, to be honest. I mean, sometimes I hated dragging myself to my laptop and typing out those 500 words, even if I did, even if I knew what I was going to try and write. I just felt some kind of computer come and go on my brain, and the story's there, isn't it? Just transpose it and put it onto the page. But we haven't got there quite yet, and granted, I probably wouldn't like that process. I think you kind of make discoveries in the agony and the struggle of writing that you might not have otherwise if it all kind of came out quite clean and quite structured and simple. And it also kind of really challenged me on the days where I didn't really want to write. And on the days where I thought, can you even write? All your life, have you just been faking it? Because clearly right now you're mangling these sentences that are coming out. But I think just get it done and do it. Because once you have it done, you can revisit, you can make it better, you can do it. If you don't write anything, then you have nothing to work on. You have nothing to show. And it can also be, a bit of a challenge to yourself, a personal challenge, and it kind of makes you grow in that kind of way. But, regardless of how I felt about it, if I was in a good mood or a bad mood, those 500 words just had to be done. So my advice is make that routine, make that target, and stick with it. And you will see results. Number 2, always finish. You can't edit something that doesn't exist. This is advice I think I heard from Neil Gaiman once, the creator of the Sandman graphic novels and American Gods and Caroline. And it's something that's kind of stuck with me and is a really good piece of advice. Always finish a project, whether it be a poem, a short story, a novel, in the case of this video, or even, granted, a YouTube video. Even if you end up hating it, not using it, not liking it, whatever, I think it's always really important to finish projects. I think you learn a lot about yourself and about your creativity and your process by finishing stuff, by becoming a finisher. It's always more rewarding than abandoning many projects and then having nothing to show for it. Even if that thing you have, you're not quite the most happy with. I think perfection is you want to get close to, but it's unreachable ultimately, I think. At least you will always be thinking, this could have been better, this could have been more. I think finishing and wrapping up projects is kind of really an underrated skill that more people need to utilize and get better at putting into their set of stuff that they can do, that I can finish a project. It kind of says something about you and what you are able to achieve, and not just your creativity and everything like that, but also kind of like your life and the goals you set for yourselves. There were so many times where I just thought about completely abandoning this draft. I absolutely hated it at times, but I think by finishing it, I soon came to understand the characters and their story a lot more than if I had just abandoned it once again, like I have with so many other projects and storylines. And as I said, if you ultimately want to step away from that finished project and not go back to it, not work on it more, that's okay, I think. But I think finishing a draft, or finishing, something that is complete to as much as it can be, is really, really important when it comes to fleshing out and developing and understanding stories. Look, I'm sure there's so many arguments for people saying if you don't love it, then leave it. It wasn't meant to be and stuff like that. And I do agree with that in elements. But I think finishing a rough structure and like really getting it done when it comes to stuff like novels is really, really super important, even if it's something that you ultimately don't want to get published, because I think it's just a skill and it kind of shows that you can do it. And I think that's really, really something that needs to be looked at more as really remarkable in people. Number 3, take it one word at a time and block out the noise. This is a lot harder than it seems. There will be days, hours, minutes, depending on how much you want to go there, where you will look at that screen or that notepad and you will think, I don't know what I'm writing anymore. I don't know the story, I don't know the characters, do I even know my own language? It can get to a place where you just have complete self-doubt about what you're actually, trying to achieve. And I'm not going to lie, that those are difficult times, difficult moments. But I think one thing you've got to remember is you need to take it one word at a time. Because one word can turn into a sentence, can turn into a paragraph, can turn into a page, can turn into a chapter. But kind of don't think about that end goal of that chapter. Think about that one word, even if it takes you half an hour to write one word, which kind of sounds like agony, to be honest, but sometimes it was like that. Sometimes, with that goal of the 500 words I was talking about earlier, I would be sitting there for 2 hours trying to get 500 words together, getting distracted, looking up other stuff, thinking I was doing, research, when really I was just trying to ignore doing the task. And this is common, I imagine. I've seen enough YouTube videos to kind of realize a lot of people are in the same headspace. But you really just have to take it one word at a time. There's a lot of YouTube videos, books, articles, everything, courses that can teach you about, dialogue and characters and plotting and all this kind of stuff. And it's easy to be kind of engulfed in that and then not actually do any of the work involved. And I really think that sometimes you just got to block out all of that stuff, and I call it the noise. Very helpful stuff, very great. But I think sometimes when you're really trying to get that story out there and the characters, if you really kind of already have a good idea of what that is, sometimes you just got to write it, even if it's going to be terrible. And then you can use all those great tips and stuff later, but they can become a distraction. They can become, they can stop you from doing the work. I think they're for later. They're for polishing. They're for getting it really superb. But for that first draft, when you want to understand what you're trying to say, regardless of if you're someone who plots heavily beforehand or if you're a seat of your pants kind of storyteller, I think it's really just important just to be there with your characters, with your story, and just to try and get it out there, because you can distract yourself endlessly otherwise, and those words, sentences, paragraphs, chapters suddenly fall away and you don't get to them. So it's really important, I think, just to kind of focus and almost on the minute in order to get words on the page. Number 4, write because you want to. I imagine this is something that's kind of pretty important to most people, maybe not so. I kind of really write because I have a particular passion and interest in it. I'm not necessarily learning it as a skill for potential monetary gain, though obviously that's ultimately a great dream of many people when they think about writing. But the reason why I raise that is because I think writing something like a novel takes a lot of your time and a lot of energy, and I think if you're thinking it's maybe a good business proposition to try and write a novel, or in a certain genre because you've read that the market's really excited for that genre, I kind of would suggest maybe to stay away from that level of thinking. Now, I'm not a published author or anything like that, so please feel free to not take this advice on. But in terms of getting through that first draft and having something finished, I think it is so important that to be interested in what you're doing from that base level passion, because otherwise I think it can easily turn into a job, which it is. I'm not going to lie, that it can be a job, but you want it to be a job that you want to go to, I guess. If something can seem like an assignment, I wonder if it can be challenging if you're a novice or amateur writer like myself to even get in there and really give it the attention and the love that it deserves in order to get it written in the first place. In today's hyper competitive world it can be very tantalizing to kind of read about the economics and the optics of novels and writing, and granted many people have probably, it's worked out for many people, I imagine. Like, how can it not? It's a pretty big industry, I would say. But I just really think that you need a level of interest and passion in the story you're trying to tell in order to get to that finish line and get it to that next stage. And after the first draft, take it to the second, after the second to the third, and so on until you can get it to a point where you can show publishers or you can self-publish. I don't know, I think that takes passion. Now, I'm only maybe talking from an amateur point of view. I imagine once writers are established, taking on a gig is probably all part of the job, but I still reckon even those authors have a passion for the material. I think it's important that you find the reason why you want to write the book, and I think it's really important to own that decision. Any additional layers or anything else that comes up after that is all kind of just, the stuff that comes after. But I think the initial core of why you want to make such a commitment is really, really important. But what do I know? I'm just a guy on YouTube. Eventually I finished that first draft. It was not great. It had a lot of lazy writing, awful plot machinations, and poor character development. But it was something to start with. It was something to go on, and I've since made several drafts of it, and I hope to keep going with it and trying to get it better and try to understand more of what I'm trying to say. For some people that comes quicker, and some people like myself, you kind of have to work through the muck and work your way through it. It might not be the most effective, but it's really taught me more about how I make creative written works. Eventually, I can hopefully get it to a state where I can potentially maybe publish. But that is another story for another video down the track, hopefully. For now, for all those sitting at your desks, bashing out those words every single day, good luck and Godspeed. Andy out.